The silence of space around Kepler 442 broke as the human exploration fleet dropped out of hyperspace. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the UES Liberty, watching the star system spread out before them on the main screen. 3 planets orbited the yellow star, and the second one showed signs of water and atmosphere. "Looks good, Captain," said Lieutenant Pete Davis from the navigation station. "No signs of civilization on any of the planets." Jake nodded and activated his communicator. "Admiral Carter, we're in position. The system looks clean for colonization surveys." Admiral Lisa Carter's voice came through clearly from the UES Defiance, the fleet's command ship. "Copy that, Jake. Begin standard exploration protocols. I want full scans of all 3 planets within 6 hours." The human fleet consisted of 12 ships. Most were exploration vessels, but 3 were military escorts. Earth had learned the hard way that space could be dangerous. The ships spread out across the system, their crews eager to begin mapping what could become humanity's newest home. 2 hours later, everything changed. "Contact," called out Ensign Amy Brooks from the sensor station. Her voice was tight with excitement and worry. "Unknown vessels approaching from the outer system. 3 ships, large signatures." Jake moved to look over her shoulder at the display. The approaching ships were massive, easily 3 times the size of the largest human vessel. Their design was unlike anything in Earth's databases. Smooth, crystalline hulls caught the starlight and reflected it in strange patterns. "Admiral, are you seeing this?" "We see them, Jake. All ships, maintain position, but go to yellow alert. Let's see what we're dealing with." The alien ships moved with purpose, forming a perfect triangle around the human fleet. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Their hulls seemed to pulse with internal light, and energy readings from the human sensors showed power levels that made Earth's best reactors look like flashlights. "Incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Sue Henderson. "It's on multiple frequencies, and they're using some kind of universal translator. Put it through." The main screen flickered and showed the interior of one of the alien ships. The being that appeared was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and 4 arms. His face was angular, with large eyes that seemed to look down at the humans with obvious disgust. When he spoke, his voice was cold and full of authority. "Primitive vessels of the species known as humans, I am Commander Velthar of the Zephyrian Galactic Empire. You have entered Imperial space without permission. This is a violation of the cosmic order that has maintained peace for 10,000 years." Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was watching the screen with interest, but none of them looked particularly worried. Pete was actually grinning. "You will immediately surrender your vessels and submit to Imperial authority," Velthar continued. "Your species will be evaluated for potential integration into the Empire as a client race. Failure to comply will result in the destruction of your primitive fleet." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence for several seconds. "Well," said Jake finally, "that's not very friendly." Pete laughed. "Did he just call us primitive? Our ships just traveled 20 light years in 3 days. What does that make them, ancient?" "Admiral," Jake said into his communicator, "did you get all that?" "Every word. What do you think, Jake?" Jake looked at his crew again. They were all watching him, waiting for his response. These were good people, trained professionals who had volunteered for dangerous deep space missions. They had families back on Earth, dreams of finding new worlds for humanity to call home. And now some alien empire was demanding they surrender without even trying to have a real conversation. "I think," Jake said slowly, "that Commander Velthar needs to learn some manners." He activated the communication system and broadcast on the same frequencies the aliens had used. "Commander Velthar, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the United Earthship Liberty. Thanks for the warm welcome, but I'm afraid we're going to have to decline your generous offer of slavery." On the screen, they could see Velthar's face change. His large eyes widened in what might have been surprise or anger. "Your response is unacceptable," the alien commander said. "You do not understand the situation. The Zephyrian Empire controls 10,000 star systems. We have maintained order in this galaxy for longer than your species has existed, You will submit or be destroyed. There is no third option. Jake scratched his chin thoughtfully. You know, Velthar, I've got to ask. If you're so advanced and powerful, why are you wasting time talking to us primitive humans? Shouldn't you just go ahead and destroy us? The alien's four arms gestured, in what looked like frustration. The Empire is merciful to lesser species. We offer you the chance to serve rather than die. This is more consideration than your kind deserves. That's very generous, Jake replied, his voice dripping with false gratitude. But here's the thing. We humans have this funny habit of not surrendering to bullies, especially ones who can't be bothered to introduce themselves properly before making threats. From across the fleet, other human voices began joining the conversation. Captain Ben Torres from the UES Ranger added, "Yeah, where we come from, threatening someone before you even know their name is considered pretty rude." Commander Helen Price from the military escort UES Viper chimed in, "My grandmother always said you catch more flies with honey than vinegar. Maybe you should try asking nicely instead of making demands." Velthar's image flickered as if the transmission was having trouble keeping up with multiple human voices. This is not how first contact protocols work. Lesser species are supposed to recognize their place in the cosmic order. "Maybe that's your problem right there," said Admiral Carter, her voice cutting through the chatter. "You keep calling us lesser. We prefer to think of ourselves as different. And one of the ways we're different is that we don't bow down to anyone just because they have bigger ships." Jake could hear laughter from other ships in the fleet. The human crews were actually enjoying this confrontation. It reminded him of his days in the military, when soldiers would joke and laugh in the face of danger to keep their spirits up. "Your attitude is incomprehensible," Velthar said, his voice rising. "We offer you life as servants of the Empire. The alternative is death. How is this choice difficult?" "Because," Jake said simply, "we'd rather die free than live as slaves. It's kind of our thing." The alien commander's face showed confusion. "Your thing?" "Yeah, our thing. Our specialty. What we're known for." Jake looked around his bridge and saw his crew nodding in agreement. "We humans have this crazy idea that freedom is worth fighting for, even when the odds are bad. Sometimes especially when the odds are bad." Velthar was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was colder than before. "Then you have chosen death. The Imperial fleet will arrive within 6 hours. Use that time to reconsider your foolish decision. When our main force arrives, there will be no further opportunities for mercy." The transmission cut off, leaving the human fleet alone with the 3 alien ships maintaining their distant watch. "Well," said Pete cheerfully, "that could have gone better." Jake activated the fleet-wide communications. "All ships, this is Morrison. I hope everyone was listening to that conversation because we've got about 6 hours before the real party starts. Admiral, what are your orders?" Admiral Carter's voice was calm and steady. "All ships maintain current positions but go to full alert. Begin combat preparations and emergency protocols. And Jake?" "Yes, Admiral?" "Nice work on the diplomacy. I don't think we could have handled that any better." Jake smiled as he looked out at the alien ships holding position around them. "Thanks, Admiral, though I have a feeling the real test is still coming." The 6 hours passed slowly. The human fleet used the time to run full diagnostics on their weapons and shields. Every crew member knew they were probably going to die, but none of them seemed particularly worried about it. They went about their duties with the same calm efficiency they showed during training exercises back home. Captain Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of the UES Liberty, checking on his crew. In the engineering section, Chief Engineer Kate Murphy was humming while she calibrated the fusion reactors. In the weapons bay, Gunner Rick Stone was cleaning the targeting systems and telling jokes to his team. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Amy Brooks from her station, "we're getting massive hyperspace signatures. Something big is coming." Jake hurried back to the bridge as space around them began to ripple and twist. The first ship that appeared made the previous alien vessels look like toys. It was enormous, easily 50 times the size of the largest human ship. Its crystalline hull blazed with internal light, and weapon ports along its sides could probably destroy planets. More ships followed. Dozens of them, all smaller than the massive dreadnought but still larger than anything humanity had ever built. They formed perfect geometric patterns around the human fleet, boxing them in completely. "Admiral," Jake said into his communicator, "I think we might have upset them." "Just a little," Admiral Carter replied. "All ships, hold positions. Let's see what they want to say this time." The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of what was obviously the command ship. The being who appeared was different from Commander Velthar. This one was larger, with darker skin and 6 arms instead of 4. Golden decorations covered his uniform, and his presence seemed to fill the screen with authority. "I am Supreme, Admiral Korthvin of the Zephyrian Imperial Fleet," the alien announced. "I have come personally to witness the surrender of the human fleet and the beginning of your species' integration into the Empire." Jake looked around his bridge. His crew was watching the screen with the same casual interest they might show for a weather report. "That's very thoughtful of you," Jake replied. "But I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. We're not planning to surrender today. We're kind of busy exploring this nice star system you've got here." The Supreme Admiral's large eyes narrowed. "There is no misunderstanding, human. Your fleet will surrender immediately, or it will be destroyed. These are the only options available to you." Before Jake could respond, another human voice cut into the transmission. "Hey, Supreme Admiral, this is Captain Sue Henderson from the UES Ranger. I just wanted to say thanks for giving us time to finish our asteroid mining operation. We found some really nice platinum deposits while we were waiting for you to show up." Korthvin looked confused. "Asteroid mining? What are you talking about?" "Oh, didn't anyone tell you?" Sue's voice was cheerfully innocent. "While your Commander Velthar was giving us his big scary speech, we figured we might as well make good use of the time. We've pulled about 40 tons of rare metals out of your asteroid belt. Hope you don't mind." Jake had to work hard not to laugh. During the 6-hour wait, several human ships had indeed been mining asteroids, both to keep busy and to gather materials for emergency repairs. Trust Sue to turn it into psychological warfare. "You are mining in Imperial space without permission," Korthvin said, his voice rising. "This is another violation of cosmic law." Captain Ben Torres from the UES Wolverine joined the conversation. "Cosmic law? Is that like international law back on Earth? Because if it is, I've got some bad news for you about how well that usually works." "Your lack of respect is astounding," the Supreme Admiral said. "Do you not understand that you are facing the combined might of an empire that has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. 10,000 years? Said Commander Helen Price from the UES Viper. Wow, that's a really long time. You must be getting pretty tired by now. Jake decided it was time to take control of the conversation before his fellow captains made the aliens so angry they started shooting immediately. "Supreme Admiral, I think we should have a proper first contact ceremony. You know, exchange gifts, learn about each other's cultures, that sort of thing." Korthvin's expression showed confusion again. "First contact ceremony? You are about to surrender. There is no need for ceremonies." "Oh, but there is," Jake insisted. "Where we come from, it's considered very rude not to exchange gifts when meeting new people. We've prepared something special for you." He gestured to Lieutenant Pete Davis, who had been waiting by the airlock with a small container. The container held items that the crew had gathered as a joke during their wait, but Jake was betting the aliens wouldn't understand human humor. "We're launching a small pod with our gifts," Jake announced. "Please don't shoot it. It's a sign of friendship." The pod drifted slowly toward the massive alien dreadnought. Jake watched on the sensors as tractor beams pulled it aboard. Several minutes passed before Korthvin appeared on screen again. This time, he looked genuinely puzzled rather than angry. "Human captain," he said slowly. "What is the meaning of these objects?" "Which objects?" Jake asked innocently. "This yellow creature made of synthetic materials. It appears to be some kind of waterfowl." "Oh, that's a rubber duck. It's for bath time. You know, when you clean yourself? Very important for hygiene." Pete was making quiet, choking sounds as he tried not to laugh out loud. "And this circular device that makes noise when compressed? That's a whoopee cushion. It simulates digestive sounds. Very funny at parties." And this sphere containing liquid and small white particles? That's a snow globe. You shake it and watch the snow fall. It's supposed to be relaxing. Supreme Admiral Korthvin stared at the screen for several seconds without speaking. When he finally found his voice, it was strained. These are your diplomatic gifts? A synthetic waterfowl? A noise-making device and a sphere of liquid? Don't forget the instruction manual, added Commander Amy Brooks helpfully. It explains how to use everything. Jake had included a handwritten note that said, "Shake. Well for best results and, warning, may cause uncontrollable laughter." This is impossible, Korthvin muttered. No species has ever responded to Imperial contact protocols this way. You should be begging for mercy. You should be offering us your most precious treasures in hopes of gaining favorable treatment. Well, said Jake thoughtfully, I guess we're just different that way. We like to keep things light and friendly. Admiral Carter's voice came over the fleet communication system. Supreme Admiral, this is Admiral Lisa Carter, commanding the human fleet. I've been listening to this conversation and I think there might be some cultural differences we need to work out. Cultural differences? Korthvin's voice was getting higher. Your species is about to be destroyed, and you speak of cultural differences? That's exactly what I'm talking about, Lisa replied calmly. You keep saying we're about to be destroyed, but you haven't actually tried to destroy us yet. Where we come from, if someone threatens you, they usually follow through pretty quickly. All this talking makes it seem like you're not really serious. About the whole destruction thing, Jake could hear similar conversations starting up across the fleet. The human crews were treating the alien threats like a debate club discussion, rather than a matter of life and death. You are trying to confuse the situation, Korthvin said. The protocols are clear. Lesser species surrender when faced with superior force. There are no exceptions to this rule. Maybe that's the problem, suggested Captain Rick Stone from the UES Falcon. You're trying to follow a rule book and we're just trying to have a conversation. Rules are made to be broken, you know. Rules cannot be broken, the Supreme Admiral insisted. The cosmic order must be maintained. Says who? Asked Sue Henderson. I mean, who exactly wrote these rules? Was there a vote? Did anyone ask the lesser species what they thought about it? Korthvin's image flickered as if the transmission was having technical difficulties. The rules have always existed. They are the foundation of galactic civilization. That's nice, said Jake. But we humans have this saying, rules are for guidance, not for worship. Maybe it's time for some new rules. The Supreme Admiral's face was changing color, shifting from pale blue to a darker purple. This conversation is pointless. You will surrender now, or face the consequences. What consequences? Asked Admiral Carter. So far, all you've done is talk. We're still here, still free, still mining your asteroids. If you're going to do something, maybe you should stop talking about it and just do it. The transmission cut off abruptly. Through the viewports, they could see the alien ships moving into what looked like attack formations. Well, said Pete quietly, I think we might have pushed them a little too far. Jake smiled as he watched the alien fleet preparing for battle. Maybe. But you know what? I'd rather go down fighting as free humans than live forever as alien slaves. Agreed, said Amy from her station. Besides, this is way more interesting than another boring exploration mission. Jake activated the fleet communications. All ships, looks like talk time is over. Everyone ready? The responses came back immediately from all 12 human ships. Every captain, every crew member, ready to fight impossible odds for the simple right to remain free. Admiral, Jake said, we're ready when you are. The alien fleet moved into position with perfect precision. Each ship took its place in a complex formation that looked like something from a military parade. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of the UES Liberty as dozens of massive vessels surrounded the small human fleet. They certainly know how to put on a show, commented Lieutenant Pete Davis from his station. Yeah, replied Jake. Too bad we're not impressed by pretty formations. The main screen flickered to life again. Supreme Admiral Korthvin appeared, but this time his expression was different. Instead of anger or confusion, his face showed cold determination. Humans, he began, his voice carrying across all frequencies. You have refused to accept the natural order of the galaxy. You mock the authority of the Zephyrian Empire. This cannot be tolerated. Jake activated his communications. Supreme Admiral, we're not mocking anything. We're just being ourselves. If that bothers you, maybe the problem isn't with us. The problem, Korthvin replied, is that your species does not understand power. You have never faced true destruction. You do not comprehend what the Empire is capable of. Admiral Lisa Carter's voice cut into the conversation from the UES Defiance. Then maybe you should stop talking about it and show us. All this threatening is getting a bit repetitive. The Supreme Admiral's large eyes narrowed. Very well. Since you cannot grasp the situation through words, perhaps a demonstration will educate you. The massive alien dreadnought began to turn, its crystalline hull catching the light from the system's star. Jake could see weapon ports opening along its sides, revealing technology that looked more like art than machinery. Observe, Korthvin announced, the fate of those who defy the Empire. The dreadnought's main weapon charged with a sound that somehow carried through space itself. Energy readings on the human sensors went crazy as power levels climbed higher than anything in Earth's databases. The target became clear as the ship aimed at the system's largest moon, a barren chunk of rock about half the size of Earth's moon. All ships, watch this, Jake announced over the fleet communications. I think they're about to show off. The weapon fired with a brilliant flash that temporarily overloaded the human sensors. When the screens cleared, they could see a beam of pure energy stretching from the alien ship to the distant moon. The beam was beautiful and terrible, a ribbon of destruction that turned space itself into a canvas of light. The moon died in seconds. The energy beam struck its surface and kept going, boring completely through the rocky body. Massive chunks of debris flew in all directions as the moon's structure collapsed. Within minutes, what had been a solid celestial body became an expanding cloud of dust and fragments. The light show was visible across the entire star system. Even from their position millions of kilometers away, the human crews could see the spectacular destruction through their viewports. The alien weapon had erased a moon as easily as a human might pop a soap bubble. The Supreme Admiral appeared on screen again, his expression smug with satisfaction. Do you understand now, humans? That moon was larger than most planets. The Empire's weapons can destroy entire worlds with a single shot. Your primitive ships would not last even 1 second against such power. The communication channel fell silent. The human fleet drifted in space, their crews presumably stunned by the overwhelming display of alien technology. Korthvin waited for the inevitable surrender, the begging for mercy that always followed such demonstrations. Instead, he heard the sound of slow clapping. Well, came Captain Ben Torres' voice from the UES Wolverine. That was pretty impressive. You blew up a rock. Congratulations. More voices joined in from across the human fleet. Yeah, nice light show, added Captain Sue Henderson from the UES Ranger. Very colorful. My nephew could do that with a science fair volcano, commented Chief Engineer Kate Murphy over the open channel. Though his explosions are usually messier. Supreme Admiral Korthvin stared at the screen in disbelief. You witnessed the destruction of an entire moon. How can you treat this as entertainment? Jake activated his communicator. Supreme Admiral, I hate to break it to you, but humans have been blowing things up for a really long time. It's kind of our specialty. Your specialty? Oh yeah, chimed in Commander Rick Stone from the UES Falcon. We've been making bigger and better explosions for thousands of years. It started with sticks and rocks, then we invented gunpowder, then chemical explosives, then nuclear weapons. Making things go boom is practically our national pastime, Captain. Helen Price from the UES Viper added her thoughts. That was about a 6 out of 10 on the explosion scale. Pretty decent for a first attempt, but it lacked style points. Style points? Korthvin's voice was rising again. Sure, Helen continued. When we blow things up, we try to make it artistic. Your beam was very straight and boring. Where's the creativity? Where's the flair? Lieutenant Amy Brooks joined the conversation from the Liberty's bridge. Plus, you took way too long to charge up. Our nuclear missiles can level cities in seconds, and they don't need 5 minutes of dramatic buildup. The Supreme Admiral's face was changing color again, shifting from blue to purple to an alarming shade of red. You are comparing primitive chemical weapons to Imperial particle beam technology? Well, said Jake thoughtfully. When you put it that way, yeah. And honestly, our primitive chemical weapons sound a lot more practical. Your weapon needs a ship the size of a small city to operate. Our weapons can fit in a briefcase. Commander Pete Davis, who had been quietly running calculations at his station, looked up with interest. Captain, according to the energy readings, that weapon used about as much power as our entire fleet generates in a week, just to blow up one moon. Really? Jake replied with exaggerated surprise. That seems terribly inefficient. We could probably blow up 3 moons with that much energy, and still have power left over for coffee. Coffee? Korthvin asked weakly. It's a human beverage, explained Admiral Carter. We need it to function properly. The point is, your weapon is impressive but wasteful, very impractical for actual warfare. The alien commander seemed to be having trouble processing this conversation. Impractical? We just demonstrated the power to destroy worlds. Sure, agreed Captain Torres, but at what cost? That one shot probably used up enough energy to power a small planet for a year. What happens when you run out of power? Do you have to go home and plug in your ship? Laughter began spreading across the human communication channels. The crews were genuinely amused by the situation, treating the terrifying alien superweapon like an interesting but flawed piece of technology. This is impossible, Korthvin muttered. Every species fears the Imperial demonstration. It shows them their place in the cosmic order. Maybe that's because you've only been dealing with species that don't know how to blow things up properly, suggested Jake. We humans have been fighting wars for our entire history. We've learned to make destruction efficient. Efficient destruction is an oxymoron, the Supreme Admiral protested. Not where we come from, replied Commander Stone. We had a saying in our military, if you're not using maximum firepower with minimum resources, you're doing it wrong, Oroin. Henderson added, besides, anyone can destroy an empty moon. That's like bragging about beating up a mannequin. Wake us up when you want to try destroying something that fights back. The communication channel fell silent again, but this time it was the aliens who seemed stunned. Korthvin stared at the screen with an expression of complete bewilderment. You are not afraid, he said finally. Should we be? Asked Jake. You blew up a rock. It was pretty, but it doesn't change our situation. We're still here, still free, and still not interested in surrendering. But you have seen our power. You know we can destroy your ships. Admiral Carter's voice was calm and steady. Supreme Admiral, we knew you could probably destroy our ships before you fired that weapon. The demonstration didn't tell us anything new. Then why do you not surrender? Jake looked around his bridge at his crew. They were all watching him, waiting for his answer. These were good people who had volunteered for dangerous missions because they believed in human exploration and freedom. They deserved an honest response. Because, Jake said simply, destroying us won't make us surrender. It will just make us dead. And dead humans can't serve your empire anyway. So what's the point? The high point is to set an example for other species. What other species? Asked Captain Torres. As far as we can tell, we're the only ones in this part of the galaxy. Your demonstration would just be wasteful. Supreme Admiral Korthvin looked like he was developing a headache. This conversation is giving me neural stress. Your species is completely irrational. We prefer to think of ourselves as independent thinkers, replied Jake. Now, are you going to keep talking? Or are we going to get to the interesting part where you actually try to make good on all these threats? The transmission cut off abruptly. Through the viewports, the human crews could see the alien fleet moving into what looked like genuine attack formations this time. Well, said Pete quietly, I think we've officially run out of talking time. Jake smiled as he watched the alien ships preparing for battle. Good. I was getting tired of all the speeches anyway. Supreme Admiral Korthvin had reached the end of his patience. The human fleet continued to float in space, showing no signs of fear or surrender Despite witnessing the destruction of an entire moon, their casual attitude toward overwhelming firepower went against everything he had learned about lesser species in his centuries of service. Combat Commander Zethran, he called to his tactical officer. Prepare a disciplinary strike. Select one human vessel and disable it. Use minimum force. We want survivors to convince the others to see reason. Yes, Supreme Admiral. Shall I target their command ship? No. Select one of the smaller vessels. We want to demonstrate that we can destroy them individually if they continue to resist. Zethran's forearms danced across his control interface, launching Fighter Squadron Alpha. 12 ships should be more than sufficient to disable one primitive human vessel. The Zephyrian fighters launched from the belly of the massive dreadnought. They were sleek, deadly machines that had served the Empire for thousands of years. Each fighter was twice the size of a human ship, and armed with weapons that could punch through military-grade armor. The pilots were veterans with decades of combat experience. Captain Jake Morrison watched the approaching fighters on his sensors. Admiral, looks like they're sending the kids out to play. I see them, Jake. Helen, those fighters are heading your way. Think you can handle them? Commander Helen Price smiled from the bridge of the UES Viper. Admiral, with all due respect, 12 fighters against one ship hardly seems fair. For them. The Zephyrian fighter squadron formed up in perfect attack formation. Squadron leader Vorthkan had destroyed rebel fleets, pirate bases, and entire planetary defense networks. Disabling one primitive human ship should take less than 5 minutes. Human vessel, Vorthkan transmitted. You are ordered to shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance is futile. Helen activated her communications. Zephyrian fighters, this is Commander Helen Price of the UES Viper. I appreciate the warning, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline your boarding party. You have no choice in the matter. Surrender now or be destroyed. You know, Helen replied conversationally. Everyone keeps using that word. Surrender. I don't think it means what you think it means. The Zephyrian fighters moved into attack position, their weapons charging. Vorthkan had expected begging or panic by now. Instead, the human ship was actually accelerating toward his squadron. Is that ship malfunctioning? Asked his wingman. I believe so. Human technology must be more primitive than reported. What happened next would be talked about in Zephyrian military academies for generations, assuming anyone survived to tell the story. The UES Viper didn't just attack the alien fighters. It went completely insane. Helen Price had been a fighter pilot before transferring to exploration ships. She had trained in combat maneuvers that would kill most alien species due to the extreme gravitational forces involved. Human bodies, evolved on a heavy world and adapted for extreme stress, could handle accelerations that would turn other species into paste. The Viper rolled, dove, and twisted through space in patterns that seemed to defy physics. It used its own hull as a battering ram, slamming into the first Zephyrian fighter and crushing its delicate crystalline armor. The alien ship exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. What are they doing? Vorthkan screamed into his communicator. That maneuver should have killed their crew. The human ship answered by spinning in a complete circle while firing its weapons in all directions. 3 more Zephyrian fighters died in the crossfire, their pilots too shocked to react properly. Evasive action, Vorthkan ordered, but his remaining fighters were already scattering. The problem was that the human ship seemed to be everywhere at once. Helen was having the time of her life. This is better than training exercises, she announced over the fleet communications. These fighters handle like luxury speeders. No real combat capability at all. The Viper performed a maneuver that military textbooks said was impossible. It flipped completely backward while maintaining forward momentum, allowing Helen to fire at fighters that thought they were safely behind her. 2 more alien ships exploded. On the bridge of the dreadnought, Supreme Admiral Korthvin watched in horror as his elite fighter squadron was being systematically destroyed by a single human ship. How is this possible? He demanded. Combat Commander Zethran was frantically checking his instruments. Sir, the human ship is pulling gravitational forces that should crush any organic crew. Their acceleration patterns indicate they should All be dead. Then why aren't they dead? I don't know, sir. The UES Viper rolled under the last group of fighters and fired upward through their formation. The aliens had expected to fight an enemy that followed normal combat protocols. Instead, they faced a human pilot who treated physics like a suggestion rather than a law. Lieutenant Dan Cooper, Helen's weapons officer, was cheerfully calling out targets. 3 o'clock high, Commander. 2 fighters trying to flank us. I see them. Helen threw the ship into a spiral that brought her weapons to bear on both targets simultaneously. This is almost too easy. Don't they teach evasive maneuvers in alien flight school? The last 2 Zephyrian fighters tried to retreat, but human technology had one advantage the aliens hadn't expected. While their weapons were more powerful, human ships were faster and more maneuverable. The Viper caught both fighters before they could reach the safety of their mothership. The entire engagement lasted less than 4 minutes. Viper to fleet, Helen announced calmly. 12 fighters down, 0 human casualties. Anyone else want to play? The silence from the alien fleet was deafening. Supreme Admiral Korthvin stared at his tactical display, unable to believe what he was seeing. His elite fighter squadron, veterans of 100 battles, had been wiped out by a single human vessel. The engagement hadn't even been close. Sir, Combat Commander Zethran said quietly, perhaps we underestimated their combat capabilities. Underestimated? Korthvin's voice was strained. They just destroyed Squadron Alpha using maneuvers that should be physically impossible. How do we underestimate that? Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication channel. Supreme. Admiral, that was a nice warm-up exercise. Thanks for sending the practice targets. Do you have anything more challenging, or are we done here? The alien commander felt something he hadn't experienced in centuries of military service. Doubt. His fighters had been destroyed so easily that it looked like a training exercise rather than real combat. Commander Price, Jake continued, how would you rate their fighter tactics? About a 2 out of 10, Captain. They flew in perfect formation, telegraphed all their moves, and panicked the moment things didn't go according to plan. My flight instructor would have failed them on the first day. Admiral Lisa Carter joined the conversation. Helen, did they give you any trouble at all? Not really, Admiral. They seemed confused when I started using 3-dimensional combat maneuvers. I think they're used to fighting enemies that stay in nice, predictable patterns. Supreme Admiral Korthvin found his voice. This is impossible. Squadron Alpha has served the Empire for decades. They have destroyed entire rebel fleets. Rebel fleets. Helen laughed. What kind of rebels were they fighting? Merchant ships. Those fighters had no combat experience against real military opponents. Real military opponents? Captain Ben Torres from the UES Wolverine explained patiently. Supreme Admiral, humans have been fighting wars in space for over a century. We've learned to use every advantage we can get, including physics, psychology, and plain old-fashioned aggression. Your maneuvers violated basic combat protocols, protested Korthvin. That's the point, replied Helen. Combat protocols are for people who want to fight fair. We fight to win. Commander Rick Stone from the UES Falcon added, Rule number 1 of human military doctrine. If you're fighting fair, you're doing something wrong. The Supreme Admiral looked around his bridge. His officers were staring at their instruments with expressions of confusion and fear. The humans had just demonstrated that Zephyrian military superiority was an illusion. Sir, whispered Zethran, what are your orders? Korthvin didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about the implications of what he had just witnessed. If one human ship could destroy an entire fighter squadron, what could 12 human ships do? What could 100 human ships accomplish? For the first time in his long military career, Supreme Admiral Korthvin of the Zephyrian Empire began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. Sir? Zethran repeated. Prepare the main fleet for combat, Korthvin said finally. All ships, maximum firepower. We end this now. But even as he gave the orders, he couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were still not taking this seriously. They had just won a lopsided victory against his best fighters, and they were treating it like a minor training exercise. What would they do when the real battle started? Supreme Admiral Korthvin stared at the tactical display showing the debris field where his elite fighter squadron used to be. 12 of the Empire's finest pilots, destroyed in minutes by a single human ship. The implications were staggering. "All ships, attack formation," he ordered. "Target the human fleet. Use maximum firepower. I want them erased from existence." The massive Zephyrian fleet began moving into position. Dozens of warships, each one capable of destroying cities, converged on the tiny human flotilla. There, weapons charged with enough energy to glass entire planets. Captain Jake Morrison watched the alien ships approaching and activated his communicator. "All ships, this is Morrison. Looks like they're finally getting serious. Everyone ready?" The responses came back immediately from all 12 human vessels. Every captain confirmed their readiness for battle. Despite being outnumbered 50-1, none of them sounded worried. "Admiral," Jake said, "we're as ready as we'll ever be." Admiral Lisa Carter's voice was calm from the UES Defiance. "Copy that, Jake. All ships, prepare for combat. Let's show them what humans can do when we stop being polite." The Zephyrian fleet reached optimal firing range. Supreme Admiral Korthvan raised his hand to give the order to fire. This would be over quickly. No species could stand against the combined might of an Imperial battle fleet. "Sir," called out sensor operator Melthon from his station, "I'm detecting massive hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system." Korthvan paused. "What kind of signatures?" "Unknown configuration, sir. Very large. Multiple contacts. The Supreme." Admiral felt a cold sensation in his chest. "How many contacts?" "Counting now, sir. 100, 200, 500. Melthon's voice was getting higher. "Sir, I'm reading over 2,000 ships dropping out of hyperspace." The main screen switched to long-range sensors. Space at the edge of the Kepler 442 system was filling with ships. Human ships. Hundreds of them, then thousands. They weren't exploration vessels like the original 12. These were warships built for combat and bristling with weapons. "What is this?" Korthvan whispered. Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication channel, but now his tone was completely different. Gone was the casual, joking attitude. When he spoke, his voice carried the cold authority of a military commander. "Supreme Admiral, allow me to introduce the 3rd Human Expeditionary Fleet. What you've been talking to for the past few hours was our diplomatic advance team." Admiral Carter's voice joined the conversation. "Supreme Admiral, this is Admiral Lisa Carter commanding the diplomatic mission. I'd like you to meet Admiral Greg Murphy of the UES Thunderstorm, commanding the main battle fleet." A new voice came over the communication system. This one was deeper, harder, carrying the weight of experience and absolute confidence. "Supreme Admiral Korthvan, this is Admiral Gregory Murphy, 3rd Fleet, United Earth Navy. I understand you've been threatening my diplomatic team." The alien commander tried to find his voice. This is impossible. Our intelligence showed only 12 human ships in this sector." "Your intelligence was correct," Admiral Murphy replied. 12 ships for diplomacy, 2,000 ships for when diplomacy fails. We always plan for both possibilities." On the tactical display, the human battle fleet was spreading out across the system in perfect formation. These weren't the casual arrangements of exploration ships. This was military precision that spoke of centuries of combat experience. "You see, Supreme Admiral," Admiral Murphy continued, "humans have been fighting wars for a very long time. We've learned some important lessons. One of them is that you should always negotiate from a position of strength." Captain Jake Morrison's voice returned to its earlier casual tone. "Sorry about the deception, Supreme Admiral. We really were just an exploration fleet. But when someone starts making threats, well, we call for backup." Supreme Admiral Korthvan looked around his bridge. His officers were staring at their instruments in shock. The human fleet outnumbered them by almost 10-1. Worse, if the performance of the UES Viper was any indication, human warships were far more dangerous than they appeared. "This doesn't change anything," Korthvan said, trying to sound confident. "The Empire has faced large fleets before. Numbers alone do not guarantee victory." "You're absolutely right," Admiral Murphy agreed. "Numbers don't guarantee victory. Training does. Experience does. The willingness to do whatever it takes to protect your people does. Commander Helen Price from the UES Viper added her voice to the conversation. Supreme Admiral, the ships you're looking at fought in the Martian Rebellion, the Titan Wars, and the Belt conflicts. They've been testing their weapons and tactics against real enemies for decades. Captain Ben Torres, from the UES Wolverine, explained further. While your empire was busy ordering people around and blowing up empty moons, we were learning how to fight wars in space, real wars, against enemies who fought back. The human battle fleet continued its advance. Each ship was smaller than the Zephyrian vessels, but they moved with a coordination that spoke of countless hours of joint training. Their formation was both beautiful and terrifying. Sir, Combat Commander Zethron whispered to Korthvin, perhaps we should consider withdrawing. We could return with a larger force. Before the Supreme Admiral could respond, another human voice joined the conversation. This one belonged to Captain Sally Watson of the UES Reaper. I'm afraid withdrawal isn't an option, Supreme Admiral. You threatened human civilians. You tried to force us into slavery. You attacked our ships. Where we come from, those are acts of war. Admiral Murphy's voice was calm but implacable. Supreme Admiral, you had your chance to handle this diplomatically. You could have introduced yourselves properly, learned about our culture, maybe even established trade relations. Instead, you chose to make threats. We offered you the chance to serve the Empire, Korthvin protested. That is more consideration than most species receive. That's exactly the problem, replied Captain Jake Morrison. You offered us slavery and called it mercy. You demanded surrender and called it diplomacy. You threatened our families and called it law. The human fleet was now close enough for detailed scans. Korthvin could see weapon systems that looked crude compared to Zephyrian technology, but there were so many of them. Each human ship seemed to carry enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Your weapons are primitive, he said, grasping for any advantage. Maybe, Admiral Murphy acknowledged, but they work, and we have a lot of them. Plus, we've learned something your empire apparently never figured out. What is that? Quantity has a quality all its own. Captain Rick Stone from the UES Falcon added, besides, you don't need fancy weapons to win wars. You just need weapons that work better than the other guys. Supreme Admiral Korthvin realized that his empire had made a fundamental error. They had assumed that superior technology automatically meant superior combat capability. The humans had just proven that assumption wrong. What do you want? He asked finally. That's simple, Admiral Murphy replied. We want you to leave. Pack up your ships, go back to your empire, and tell them that this part of the galaxy is under human protection now. The Empire will not accept this humiliation. Then the Empire will learn the same lesson you're learning today, said Captain Sally Watson. We don't start fights, but we finish them. Admiral Carter's voice joined the conversation one last time. Supreme Admiral, we tried to do this the easy way. We offered friendship, cultural exchange, and mutual respect. You chose to respond with threats and violence. Now you get to see what happens when humans stop being diplomatic. Admiral Murphy added, we're reasonable people, but we have a very low tolerance for bullies. The human fleet had completed its deployment. 2,000 warships surrounded the Zephyrian force in a perfect sphere. Every weapon was trained on the alien vessels. The tactical situation was hopeless for the Empire. You have 1 hour to begin your withdrawal, Admiral Murphy announced. Any ship that hasn't started moving toward the edge of the system by then will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. Supreme Admiral Korthvin looked at his tactical display one last time. His proud fleet, which had seemed so powerful just hours ago, was now trapped and outgunned. The humans had turned a routine first contact into a complete military disaster. Sir? Zethron asked quietly. Your orders? Korthvin closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, his voice was tired but resigned. Signal the fleet. Begin. Withdrawal procedures. We're going home. As the Zephyrian ships began their slow retreat, Captain Jake Morrison's voice came over the communication system one final time. Supreme Admiral, when you report back to your empire, make sure you tell them something important. What is that? Tell them that humans tried to be friendly. Tell them we offered peace and cooperation. And tell them that when you responded with threats and violence, you learned why that was a mistake. Admiral Murphy's voice carried across space as the alien fleet limped away. Welcome to the neighborhood, Supreme Admiral. Next time you visit, try knocking instead of threatening. You might find humans can be very good neighbors when you treat us with respect. The Zephyrian fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying with them the news that would change the galaxy forever. Humanity had arrived, and they weren't going to bow to anyone.